acronyms, techno jargon, and misinformation to get to the truths that hold real value for real people in the industry.
Hello and welcome. My name is Mike Yost. I am your host today, and I'm really excited that you could join us here for the next edition of the Sesame Smart Manufacturing Mindset LinkedIn Live series, where in every episode we challenge our guests and all of us involved here to think differently about smart manufacturing. So far in this series, we have learned from Sesame members and thought leaders about looking at smart manufacturing as a core capability, the way that quality and safety are today. We've talked about the convergence of IT and OT and how we need to empower plant operations teams with modern tool sets to solve problems while also having well thought out enterprise IT guide rails in place. And we've learned about sustainable manufacturing from some of the most practiced and seasoned corporate leaders around. So it's been very powerful so far, and we're really excited today to be talking about unleashing the power of AI in manufacturing. So joining me for this discussion today are Maria Araujo, Director and Fellow of Advanced Technology Strategy and Transformation at Johnson & Johnson, where she leads supply chain technology strategy and management for advanced technology areas. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
We also have Brian Evergreen, who's the founder and CEO of the Profitable Good Company. He's an executive AI strategist and the author of Autonomous Transformation, a book that's very relevant to the topic today, and we will definitely be talking more about that with Brian. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
And last, we have Sanjeev Heda, who's the IoT Principal Industry Consultant at SAS. Sanjeev, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're looking forward to a really energetic conversation on a very energetic topic nowadays. Before we get into talking with the folks here, I want to just cover a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, if you do not know Sesame, you really should. Sesame is the U.S.'s National Institute on Smart Manufacturing. They're a public-private partnership that is a membership organization driving research, educational deliverables, and also driving an ecosystem around smart manufacturing at a national level. And they use events like this to help build out the ecosystem. And this event would not be possible if not for the partnership with SME, who is partnering with Sesame to deliver this webcast series. Our goal with this series is to think differently about leadership, about technology, about what it means to be a modern day manufacturer, excuse me. Also let you know, obviously we are live streaming on LinkedIn Live. We welcome your comments. I can see that people are already starting to put some information in the chat. So please go ahead and do that. We will do our best to monitor that and respond to questions if and as appropriate to the conversation. The event is being recorded, and you'll be able to watch this as many times as you like on YouTube and also on the Sesame website. If you don't know Sesame, I encourage you to get to know them. Check them out on LinkedIn. Check them out at sesame.org, where you'll learn about all the good work they're doing around projects and research, education, their membership options, and much, much more. So with that, let's get on to the topic at hand today, where we're going to be discussing unleashing the power of AI in manufacturing. And so I want to start with Maria and have all of you talk on this topic, but what evidence do we have to support the claims that AI can truly enhance efficiency and productivity in manufacturing processes? And I would ask each of you just to give a little bit of your background and experience so people understand the context that you're coming from.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. So yeah, a little bit of a background on myself. My background, I started my career in aerospace, and I worked in aerospace and space and energy industry R&D. And now obviously I'm in healthcare and supply chain for both pharmaceuticals and medical devices. And my background in terms of schooling, I am have an electrical engineer background. So thanks for the question. I think obviously AI it's top of mind for everybody these days, and there's a big hype around it, right? And in terms of areas where I've seen AI really make a key difference, right, from a deployability perspective, because I think I like to think of things. Oh, and actually, before I mention that, my role at J&J, I am in advanced technology for supply chain. So my role and my team's role is really to be looking to the future and building, enabling our future supply chain in the area specifically of sensing and IoT and robotics. But then going back to the question, right? I think AI again is top of mind for everybody, but I like to think of it in two categories. One is the nascent area of the area in some areas. If we think about like generative AI and so forth, and like the exploration part of it. The other piece of it is the deployment level scalability of some of these applications. So to answer this question in terms of where I see a lot of efficiency and productivity improvements, I'll focus on the areas that we've seen, at least at J&J, that we've been able to really deploy at scale globally, these technologies, right? We went past the lab, we went past the pilot level, and there are quite a few areas I would say, but the ones that come to mind at the top, I think predictive maintenance, I think is one of the top ones, right? I think this is an area that AI, especially in supply chain and manufacturing, really kind of had its first role. And it's an area that I've seen AI really make a difference in terms of allowing us to at times predict failures earlier, and even precursors to failure that allow us to kind of keep the productivity and efficiency in our production lines, for example. So that is definitely one that I would consider an area where AI is becoming quite mature at this point, and again, scalable. A couple of other areas I would highlight is perception, specifically for robotics. As we think about robots, and obviously we use robots for decades at this point, but where AI is really making a difference at this point, even at a scale level and moving the needle, is to adding those advanced perception capabilities to a lot of those robotic automations. So things like 3D vision combined with AI to allow robots to really deal with changes in the environment. Instead of just being programmed to do repetitive tasks, they can actually deal with uncertainty by adding these advanced perception capabilities, which are combinations of sensors and AI. So those are a couple of areas where I see a lot of where we are seeing the needle move in terms of productivity and really advancement of areas. And again, there are others, right? But those are the top two that I would highlight.
Excellent. Appreciate those insights. Brian, how about you? You want to share with us your thoughts on where value is driven with AI?
Absolutely. So by way of introduction, I'm Brian Evergreen. I recently left Microsoft Research, where I was leading autonomous AI co-innovation globally. Prior to that, I was the AI strategy lead for Microsoft US, and manufacturing was one of our priority industries for the work that I was leading. And so in terms of, and I recently wrote a book, Autonomous Transformation. And and in terms of the productivity opportunity that AI presents, there's quite a bit of evidence, and I can speak directly from the work that I was a part of at Microsoft, that we primarily targeted use cases that we would partner on that were 7-figure in terms of value, which obviously varies significantly based on the size of the manufacturer. But I would say that primarily in terms of the evidence that there is a support that there are real opportunities for efficiency. There's a proliferation. There's quite a bit of evidence that supports that. But I think that I would push it a step further to say, not only in terms of aiming for efficiencies and productivity, but also for aiming for entire new ways to think about doing work. And I think that AI, and not just generative AI, which is only sort of one piece on the chessboard, so to speak, but artificial intelligence and these advanced technologies give us an opportunity to rethink the ways that we're approaching operations all up, especially but also the partnership between operations and design, I think, is another great example, but of how we can extend beyond simply achieving greater efficiencies and doing what we've already been doing and adding to our existing value prop more efficiently, but also to continue to disrupt or to change the way that we're working, not only within operations, but across the rest of the lines of business.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Sanjeev, how about your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. For those that don't know me, Sanjeev Heda, I'm a principal industry consultant at SAS in our Internet of Things division. So my focus and my role currently is providing thought leadership to help drive advanced analytic solutions across multiple industrial verticals, such as manufacturing. And we've talked about, I hear, people talk about IoT connected devices. How do we take that information and leverage to improve business outcomes, such as asset utilization, equipment availability, and product quality. And just for context, I've been with SAS for 5 years. And then before that, I was with GE Power, enabling predictive maintenance for over 10 years for their heavy duty power generation equipment. So when Maria says power, predictive maintenance being the leading piece, I'm like, yep, completely understand that fully. Regarding evidence, I hear the same things that I would say, across Brian and Maria, like when we see the impact AI has, especially when we look at the successes our customers have had using SAS, right, to improve asset performance, product quality. One thing we saw interesting more recently is reducing energy consumption. So some specific use cases that we've seen, from our side is a large pulp and paper company that's be able to increase their OEE by 10%. But also, as Maria was talking about the scale of deploying and operationalizing, they have over 10,000 models running in the production system. We have a building materials leader applying quality and process optimization across 20 facilities. And we have a European manufacturer who supplies building materials, was able to use AI to reduce their energy consumption, given the disruption in natural gas prices and availability across their clay brick factories. And so, to me, the big thing is around these use cases that they're great examples to show the impact of AI is that you have real tangible results, right, that these customers are seeing. I think Brian hit on the head. It's the adoption of the AI by the organization. It's not just the data scientists, but the operations and other folks are participating in this. And as Maria was saying, it's like, going beyond the pilots and the proof of concepts, we're really able to deploy and go to scale.
Thank you for that. And maybe we'll stick with you, Sanjeev, here for a second. There was a question that was submitted actually before we even started asking about smaller manufacturers. And I guess one of the things that I think about all the time is, and you just mentioned the number of models and the amount of data that folks have. So where within the manufacturing domain is there enough data? Like, is it in supply chain? Is it in the manufacturing operations? Can somebody that's working on a plant floor expect that AI is a real tool for them where they are, or is it higher level, more holistic?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, for me specifically, I've been more focused on the manufacturing operations, asset utilization, and performance. And, the key thing is when you think about AIs, do you have enough data? You're always trying to think of what are you trying to solve in terms of the use case, how complex and challenging it is, and what all data is needed to. And it's not enough that the data itself is there, that you produce it, but then is it in a form that where you can capture it and be able to leverage AI with it, right? Because the data production is one piece, right? But is the data being stored and accessible, right? Because some of this could be, I think we talk about IoT, the convergence of IT and OT systems coming together to be able to capture and analyze that data. Some of the data you may need, especially like in a predictive maintenance, if you need asset maintenance information, might be just a physical paper. Where does the data exist, whether it's data silos or not, right? So how do you join all that data together just to be able to make a sense of what you're trying to do, again, for the context of building an AI model. The third piece is around data quality. I think everybody hears garbage in, garbage out, right? You're only going to be as good as your data. So if you have gaps in knowledge, things that you may need to go back and understand, then you need to understand, is that usable? And then the last piece is, if you need other data sources, external data sources, such from your customers, from your suppliers, et cetera, just to, again, provide a bigger picture. And so when we look at smaller to medium manufacturing companies and so forth, they might be early on in their journey, especially when we look at this from an IoT perspective, with more devices being connected. Usually you would start small, right? Go with a tangible use case, take 1 to 2 data sources that you can easily take advantage of, go after low-hanging fruit to show the value of AI, get your hands on it, and then show that capability to then go into the next use case. So you can identify other data sets and other things that you may need to pull into so that you can go after those more complex challenges. So to me, it's like you don't start it with all at once. You kind of start small and grow from there.
Excellent. When you talk about the quality of the data and capturing and transforming it, et cetera, obviously you are singing Sesame's story here, right? That is foundational to what the Institute is about here. So, Maria, would you like to share your thoughts on the topic?
Sure. I think in terms of, is there enough data? And speaking specifically from the angle of a large manufacturer, right? In this case, it's a mix. For certain types of applications, we have gazillions of data. In other types of applications, we may have very little and have to acquire the data. So it really depends on the type of application. Generally speaking, and I speak from, again, a supply chain, a large manufacturer. And when I say supply chain, it includes all the way from raw materials, manufacturing, distribution, logistics, all the way to our customers, patients, and so forth. So what I would say that for a lot of types of applications, there's a lot of data. And the challenge today to really leverage that power of AI is largely around integrating and contextualizing that data. And I was at a conference recently, a couple of months ago, that the average large manufacturer has over 50 ERP systems. As you think about, these large companies that acquire other companies and are highly global, it's very disparate, the system. So I think one of the key challenges in terms of really that propulsion of AI is of course many times acquiring that data, but largely there's a lot of territory that hasn't really progressed today because there's tons of data, but the data is very fragmented, and therefore being able to integrate that data and contextualize that data to then be able to leverage AI for the greater good, in other words, or to really get the efficiencies from that and connect things, comes as a step kind of 2 or 3. But I would say there's significant work today just in being able to integrate and contextualize that data. So to me, that is where a lot of the energy and even innovation in a lot of aspects has to happen, as well as can we really integrate and contextualize that data in very fragmented global level systems for that. So I think that's a key thing, and fragmented and siloed data as opposed to lack of data.
Yeah, again, you're singing the Sesame story here with the value of the contextualization and the role it plays in these types of initiatives. Brian, you have thoughts on the topic there?
I do. The first thing I'd say is that data, if you break it down to its most basic element, data is a signal that doesn't necessarily represent expertise. And so I think the most important thing that we have in operations on the factory floor or in the supply chain, wherever it might be across your organization, that the human expertise is still the most valuable resource. And the process of trying to develop AI solutions that can then be leveraged for higher efficiencies or for new use cases, ultimately we're trying to find and purify data and clean it up and model against it to be able to try to represent some level of expertise that might match a certain domain expert level of efficiency or something that they've already uncovered in their daily work. And so I'd say that in terms of the amount of data that you need to do that, it varies significantly based on what it is you're trying to solve for. And so I think that there's some use case. I think there's a lot of, like, when you look at OpenAI and what they've done with ChatGPT, you hear about these billions or trillions of parameters. And I think that can be that sounds like an awful lot to a small to medium or even a large manufacturer. That's still quite a bit of data. And so, but there's use cases you can start with where maybe you don't even need to pull data from a historian. You literally point a camera at an existing gauge, and then you use an off-the-shelf classifier to be able to translate that into digital signal and start storing that, and then laying the human expertise on top of that to be able to determine, okay, when I as a human see that signal, what do I do? And starting to create, like, that's a form. It's a very relatively simple form, but to Sanjeev's point about starting small with low-hanging fruit, that's an example. The second thing I'd say is that there's a lot of focus on machine learning and how do we make meaningful patterns out of data to then be leveraged and applied in production. The second half of that I would say is machine teaching is another paradigm that I think is extremely important, especially in manufacturing, because there's a whole swath of use cases that you can't really instrument for. But within machine teaching paradigm, you can leverage deep reinforcement learning paired with either data-driven or first principle simulations and with human expertise on top to be able to recreate expertise in a way for the machine to generate its own data in a simulated environment, so it's getting that reinforcement to be able to address. And an example is with a CNC machine that where an operator was listening to different distinct sounds, right? And based on the sound, they knew what they needed to do. There's not data that you would already have, or that you need to go comb for that. Instead, once you determine that's it, a level of human expertise that you want to work backwards from, then you know what you need to instrument for, and then translate that human expertise into a representative model that the machine can then learn and understand, to then be able to replicate that control decision at the same way that the human would. So those are some of the thoughts I'd share on that side of things.
Fantastic thoughts. And we went down, the smaller company, the plant level, and Brian, your experiences in the executive level. And I want to sort of combine the question. I wanted to take this up and ask you about how executives view, or leaders view, in your experience, AI, and sort of combine that with a question that came up, and again, encourage people to submit questions, and we see Jeff and Louise and Julian and Jules. Jules asked a question about smaller manufacturers being able to use data sets from larger manufacturers, and I guess a question maybe to tie in with your point of, are people willing to share that way? Do you see examples when people were talking about corporate data? I tend to see people probably have more barriers up than willingness to share and things. So maybe you could touch on that from the sort of the strategic level.
Absolutely. So the thing I'd say about sharing data models is that some of the precursors to being able to make data useful do require a significant amount of investment in building data-driven models or first principle simulations of machines. And I've been excited about some of the discussions that I've been seeing take place around creating marketplaces, for these kinds of precursors to valuable applications of AI. So, for example, if General Electric is building data models, for representations of machines that they're leveraging in their factories, to be able to then apply, reinforcement learning, or be able to apply, artificial intelligence or machine learning to create artificial intelligence solutions. That if a small to medium manufacturer has the same machine that GE does, and there's not a competitive element to the fact that they both need a simulation, simulated representation or digital twin of that machine, that's not a competitive element, right? And so being able to create marketplaces so that, especially as large manufacturers create those representations of those sims of their machinery, to be able to in a way monetize that, kind of akin to the way, for those who are familiar with Power BI and the fact that there's a marketplace for people who create the advanced visuals. I believe Tableau and others have similar types of frameworks. And so I think those are some of the discussions that I've seen that I've been pretty excited about, being able to sort of democratize some of the things that are not competitive, but that are precursors to an area where there really is a significant talent shortage. The second thing that even amongst the Fortune 500, right, there's a talent shortage in terms of data scientists. The second thing that I say to your question about how executives are thinking about AI, it's been interesting to see since my role as the US AI strategy lead for Microsoft to today, especially in the last 8 months or so since ChatGPT came out, the sort of transition, right? I think that the attitudes have shifted a bit, but the overarching theme that I've seen is concern about, how do I talk to my workforce, to the people that work in my organization about this? What is this, human machine, the story of humans and machines that we're all a part of? What is it now that AI can do X? What does that mean for us? And how should we be thinking about that? So it's often at the executive level, it's much less about, okay, what's the art of the possible, and how can we use this to carve out, at least the organizations I've spoken with, almost never is the discussion around how can we use this to cut jobs. I've heard that literally one time out of hundreds and hundreds of discussions with C-level executives at these large organizations. The vast majority of them are saying, okay, so for example, this application of technology could help our operators on the front line to move more from operations work to stewardship, for example. And so there's a lot of excitement around helping the people do more. And if anything, there's a concern about how do I, if I'm investing this technology, how can I make sure that I'm communicating with my people in the right manner, that I'm being honest with them, and what level of transparency can I have around the plans that we're making, and then what does it look like to reskill, and how do we help with our organization to transform given the technology that's already available and is continuing to come. That's sort of the altitude test from the exec level that I've seen.
Well, that is really good to hear. Sanjeev, maybe your perspective, are you hearing similar things, or what's your perspective?
Yeah, well, I guess two things. One, when we talk about the small and medium manufacturers, something from what Brian's answers was, we talk about sharing of data. I think the one key thing that we've seen too that's been pretty successful is it's accelerators, right? Because I mean, to me, there's different levels of AI maturity and so forth. And I mean, let's say for predictive maintenance, because again, that's my more core background and so forth. Like, how do we get people to start with like more of a template and accelerators to start saying, hey, we can build you these digital twins automatically using AutoML for IoT that SaaS has and so forth, to be able to get started and enable those folks. And so they may have the subject matter expertise, but the whole democratization of being able to build those models and get started, right? So start with something more of a template, leveraging your own data, and then get the success, and then start to identify those gaps and look at the augmentation. Because I think there's solutions out there, accelerators that folks can consider to pull in, right, to kind of help to get them started, as Brian indicated too, with the talent gap and so forth that manufacturers may see. Regarding executives and the impact of AI, I mean, they definitely see a lot of impact from it, especially with recent history. We talk about volatility of supply chain, the energy costs with that European manufacturer because of the Ukraine challenge overseas, and generally just trying to do more with less. So I think now what we're seeing is that AI initiatives are able to start off with less strict requirements, so they're able to kind of get started, get going, because they see that as a strategic imperative. And regarding the workforce, we're seeing that the executives it's not the replacement, it's more like the augmenting and aiding the workforce, right? So how do you make them more efficient and effective? Kind of what Maria was saying earlier about asset maintenance, what AI can do in terms of predicting things ahead of time, but it can do so many different levels of that. It can look for when a potential issue is about to occur. It can look to see what is the root cause and maybe next best action. And then you can feed that all into an optimization to determine when's the best time to take that action, because it might consider personnel, labor costs, like other pieces that you may want to maintain. And so I think one is just how do you augment and aid the workforce? And the one thing we haven't really talked about when we say AI, it's not a static one-time activity, right? Like you need to constantly curate it, make sure it's solving the objective. Things may change that you need to keep it with the latest information. And so we always talk at SaaS about the analytic lifecycle, where it's a continuous process. Those models are monitored and retrained. And so kind of to Brian's point, the workforce, right? It's not an opportunity for, AI just to help them with their tasks and responsibilities, but how can they participate to curate content, use cases that can help them continuously build better models. So what we're seeing, and kind of like, again, just extending what Brian is saying, is just reimagining what the workforce would be doing in the future.
Yeah, fantastic. Maria, obviously you're responsible for strategy in the supply chain and such. So how does your organization, or what can you speak to broadly as far as how AI is viewed from a corporate level?
Sure. I think, a lot of it was said already. So without covering some of the points I already discussed that I agree with, I would say that ultimately, from a workforce perspective, we see AI, it's a matter of upskilling people. So it's not about replacing jobs, it's about upskilling the levels of jobs that can be done. So from that perspective, and upskilling our workforce. So it's an opportunity for that advancement, just like, previous industrial revolutions were. And I think keeping that, and we already see a lot of that it's enabling people, for example, in the production lines that are very close to some of the efficiency bottlenecks we have, to themselves actually start solving some of those problems with technology many times, or minimally be able to suggest those things. So I think that's opening that whole opportunity there, which in turn obviously upskills those jobs as well. So that's what I would say around the workforce. It's really an opportunity for that rather than job replacement or elimination. And then I guess from a data perspective, I think we covered that there's, generally speaking, I would put data in three buckets. One is the proprietary data, competitive type data. There's the non-competitive type data, and then there's the data we don't know, right? So I would say for the competitive and we don't know, of course, there's more probably restrictions there, but in terms of the other type, there's a lot of benefits. In fact, we've seen there, if we go back to the theme here, one of the applications we talked about, which is predictive maintenance, there are solutions out there today that are leveraging data from multiple thousands of assets from many different manufacturers in different industries. And that has a huge value proposition, which is therefore, rather than, hey, I'm going to deploy a predictive algorithm for this asset, and it's going to take us 4 months to develop and learn and deploy and test, it's working in a matter of 2 weeks because the algorithm is already developed, because it's leveraging all of that industry data, and it's just some fine tuning that's needed. So it's a huge value proposition. So I think besides what was already covered by the other panelists, it's all, we can never forget what is the value proposition. So when we talk about, hey, let's openly share data, it's great, but what is the value proposition of sharing that data? That needs to be thought. When the value proposition is clear, it's going to open a lot of doors. If the value proposition is not clear, then it's like, why are people going to share their data? So I think that's the mindset we need to have as well. So it's that we need to keep the eye on the prize and what's the value proposition.
Well, you all brought up the human element, and I definitely want to get to Brian's thoughts on that as his book and his experiences all around that. But Maria, just one thing pops into my head as you were just talking there. Obviously, you deal with regulated environments, right? Being in the industries that you're in now, does that create? And I assume other people that are watching or have similar challenges. So, does that create any challenges for you when it comes to AI and the data sharing and such?
So regulations obviously play a key role, especially in the areas that I'm focused on, which is pharmaceuticals and medtech, which are heavily regulated industries, right? And again, it depends on the application. Certain types of applications may incur very little to no regulations. If we think sometimes about predictive maintenance, and again, generally speaking, I'm not talking every time, right? But other areas, there is a heavy impact by regulations. And I would say that in this space, regulations are still evolving and being shaped. And as we see the pace of AI technologies really fastly progressing, it's going to take time for all of that to really keep up with that kind of pace, right? So I think the key here from our perspective is that it highlights the importance of manufacturers and for there to be a close collaboration between manufacturers, governments, academia, policymakers to ensure that all the requirements are being addressed for adoption and implementation of these types of technologies when it comes to heavily regulated applications. So I would say it's an evolving area. It has a significant impact on the adoption of AI. And what I would highlight is the key thing, it's still evolving, but that collaboration is already happening, but that needs to be accelerated because to keep up with the pace at which the technology is evolving.
Well, excellent. Appreciate that. And I think we could go down that path and continue that conversation thread for a long time, but we're trying to hit on a number of different things. I definitely do want to come back to the human element as well. It's come up a number of times in this conversation, and we will provide the name and of Brian's book so anybody out there can get it. But Brian, your book's entitled Autonomous Transformation. There we go. You talk about creating a more human future in the era of AI. So could you talk about that, and maybe all the panelists will just talk about the human side of AI?
Absolutely. So the work that I've been doing, or that I was leading at Microsoft, I was trying to uncover why is it that only 13% of AI projects make it through into production as one of the key themes. And initially I thought, I think a lot of us, our mental model is, okay, it's a technology thing, AI. So we have to adjust what we're doing with the technology or the way that we're constructing the project or the initiative. And what I've uncovered is that actually the way that we get more value out of AI starts with how we're working with and treating the people, the humans that are in our organization and in our ecosystem. And so we've inherited a leadership style or a leadership system from the Industrial Revolution that starts with a mechanistic mindset of the world and of organizations as big machines. And when you have a machine, the way to make it better is to eliminate deficiencies, right? If a machine goes down, get rid of the deficiencies, you can get it back up. If you want to improve the performance, eliminate more deficiencies. That's different when it comes to an organization, which is not a machine. It's made up of humans, right? And so the mechanistic mindset and thinking of a machine, an organization like a large machine, is one of the things that worked well in the 20th century because the context was completely different. People didn't have visibility to other jobs, and they didn't have the ability to network with anyone in the world, and there was a lot less options, right? So you could fundamentally treat your people like cogs in a machine and still continue to make incremental value. And I don't think that most people come with that mindset of like from a malfeasance perspective. I think that's just the leadership system that's persisted out of the Industrial Revolution. And so I think that the book is one of the key elements is, as I paint the picture for autonomous transformation, the next era of transformation beyond digital transformation. What I wanted to pair that with is actually we also need a new leadership style that is human-centered in order for us to harness the economic and societal potential of these technologies.
Well, that's fantastic. I look forward to reading the book. And those of you online watching, there's a comment in the chat with a link to that. So I open it up to Sanjeev and Maria. Do either of you have any comments to the points on the human interaction with AI?
I think the one thing that we've seen, with AI and just, the information that's produced and so forth is like how trustworthy and is it received by the user, depending on what your objective is and so forth. Because, if you have someone that says, hey, I'm going to try to do this X thing, but I don't know how you came to that decision or have confidence potentially into it, right, then you're going to show skepticism and so forth to that. So to me, like when we think about human AI collaboration, how they work together, I think Gardner had a good paper on this recently to talk about the different levels of interactions, like decision support, right, where the humans are using the AI output, but they're the ones making the decision augmentation, right, where the AI is coming up with recommendations, but the human makes the final choice, and then decision automation, where it's, human out of the loop, everything's happening close, and be able to do so. So I think it weighs through a couple things, right? Like how fast do you need to respond? What's the impact of it? What's the impact of a wrong choice, right? So like you got to think AI is not going to be 100% correct. So if there's an impact to that, and just understand, like, as time goes on, as you get more information, as you have humans working through providing additional data sets to understand, like, how would they make those decisions, then you can move that more towards AI. So to me, it's an evolution, right? Like you don't start with everything in the first place, and it's always a balance of, the risk, the benefits, right? What's the challenges, and just how do you go from there?
Excellent. Appreciate that. I just saw the most recent Mission Impossible movie this weekend. And so it brought up some of those themes of, can you trust the information you're getting? So I'm tracking with you on that. Maria, anything you want to add there on the human side?
I think I mostly covered already, right? So I think it's becoming more and more closer to people. If you think about AI back in, like 7-8 years ago, I remember going to a oil and gas conference and talking about machine learning. Nobody even knew what that meant. And today, in that industry, right? And today it's our kids that are like 8 years old know about ChatGPT, and some using it already. So it's changing the interaction with the technology, and it's fastly evolving as well. So it's key that we pay attention, and it needs to be, like Brian was saying, it needs to be central to strategies around it, because it's going to happen. And I think a lot of it also is going to revolve around the trustability of those algorithms, and how those decisions are being made, and so on and so forth, and being mindful of that as well. So I think that would be what I would add here.
So I know we need a lot more time on this, but our goal is always to keep this around 40 minutes, and we're at that point. And I want to sort of start to wrap us up here and ask each for a takeaway. But before we do, a couple of times ChatGPT has come up, and you just mentioned it, Maria. So if you wouldn't mind commenting, Do you think the Chat GPT experience, not just what you're hearing about it, but people are playing with it, vendors are embedding it and working. So do you think it's helping the conversation in manufacturing, the Chat GPT conversation right now?
Yeah, and again, the ChatGPT is still nascent, right, from an industry adoption perspective in this space. But yeah, it's definitely a revolutionizing type of addition to the AI. AI was already hot, but it definitely changes the landscape of things. And I think it's going to there's, I would say, exponential increase in the interest of the technology, and yes, I do think it's going to open a lot of doors. But again, it's balancing that with the other side of it, right? And which is the trustability, the quality of the decisions being made, and how can we effectively use that, especially like if we go back to regulations, et cetera. So there's a lot to still happen for that to reach that point, but obviously it's already making a huge impact, I would say, even in our simple lives, the day-to-day life, right? You can ask ChatGPT to plan your trip, your next trip for you, and it will come up with something pretty cool, and you don't have to think about it.
Excellent. Well, I know, Brian, I saw an article that you wrote, I think for CIO Magazine, that said ChatGPT is not your strategy or something along those lines. Maybe you want to comment on that?
Yes, it was ChatGPT is not your AI strategy. Yes. And effectively, the way I describe it, and feel free to find the article on CIO.com, but is that if you think about a comparison to a chess game, it starts with your vision, and then you set your strategy, and then planning, which involves tactics, and then finally the pieces. Right. And ChatGPT is one of the pieces on the chessboard, but you don't determine what your next move is going to be by randomly selecting a piece. And then, or maybe the person over there is using that piece, so you should pick up the same piece and then determine where you're going to put it. Instead, you start with what's my vision for the future of my organization? And then what strategy do I need to put in place to make that vision inevitable? And that may not involve ChatGPT, or any generative AI. And the second thing I'd say is that I think people are excited about language models right now, and I think language models are powerful. And the evolution as it goes from a language model to a knowledge model to a causal model. There's a whole journey that organizations need to go through to get to the point where that's actually useful. So I'm excited about the fact that I think the way that to your core question, I think it is going to be helpful and is starting to be helpful for manufacturers to be able to have more conversations around AI. But the thing that I've been quick to clarify is to think of it as one piece on the board, and to not start with what am I going to do with ChatGPT, but to start with what is it that we want to do with our organization in the next 1 to 3, 5+ years, and then work backwards from that future that you want to get to. And that'll determine whether ChatGPT is relevant to that future that you're working to build.
Excellent. Sanjeev, your thoughts on ChatGPT and whether it's helping the conversation in manufacturing?
I was going to say, I think Brian and Maria cover most of the talking points, and I think it's the same pieces, right? One is, I think, the awareness, the powerfulness of what you can do, right, to have that more natural language interaction, and then also people just being cautious, right? Like, I think people see on the internet, like, you can, write certain prompts to give it wrong answers, and then do you trust it? Or even like when we think about like what it's being used to train that model, does it have any implications of security, privacy, other things that were not considered? So you got to think about that trustworthiness piece of it. So, but yeah, I think it's a great, exciting piece. I really like how Brian described it as it's a piece as part of your chess set, right? And you got to think about broadly, what is your vision? Where do you want to go? So.
Yeah. Well, and I from my experience in industry, like if folks don't trust the data, they don't trust the output, then they will dismiss it summarily, and you'll have a really hard time getting back at getting their trust back. So maybe Sanjeev, if you want to stay with the microphone here, we need to wrap it up here. So I just ask each of you, just give the audience, folks that are listening now, just one takeaway when it comes to this topic of unleashing the power of AI in manufacturing.
Great. So I assume you want me to go first, correct?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So, I mean, I think it's exciting. I think, you've heard different pieces of like how AI is impactful, how people are looking at it. I think for me, the big thing that I've seen, especially in the last 5 years, is that it's a great tool to have, but it's not enough by itself to improve the business outcomes and to drive the change, right? And so while there's multiple facets that you would need to consider, you always hear people talk about people, process, and technology, right? So I think over multiple different parts of this, right, we talk about adoption of AI by the organization, right? Like, how do we get the subject matter experts and plant operators to be brought in to understand how can I improve what they do on a day-to-day basis, right? How to have them help curate the use cases and the data that needs to be used, right? And adopt the insights and actions that are generated. I think Brian alluded for my second point is that it's not just AI, but there's what I would consider complete analytic pipelines, right? So that can have layers of different techniques, right? That can include business logic, physics. You can have digital twins that can transform the whole data sources into actionable intelligence. And then the last thing that's been more recent to me, I know I've been doing a lot of work in AI with manufacturing around computer vision, around product quality and worker safety. And that's really like the deployment and operationalizing of these AI models and pipelines. And when we're doing that, that's at the manufacturing facility, we're doing at the edge and so forth. So then we're having to consider, like, how do we make sure if these are mission critical applications that they have the right hardware, security, redundancy, and resiliency. And again, all those points are important because we want to go beyond the pilot, beyond the proof of concept to show how could we scale this out across multiple facilities, multiple locations to be successful, especially when you think about the variation there. So the piece to me is like AI is a big piece, right? It has a lot of capabilities, but there's more to it to be widely adopted and scaled out.
Excellent. Maria, how about you? You want to give us a takeaway here from the conversation today?
Sure. I would say, my key takeaway is really to focus on the business problem and not on the technology. I think whether it's AI or blockchain or whatever the technology may be, right? AR, VR, I think the traps that people can easily fall into is falling in love with the technology or focusing on the technology and not on the problem. We talked a little bit about, a lot of AI projects don't get out of the pilot stage. And while there are a variety of reasons for that, a key reason for that is because sometimes these projects, the ROI for that project, right, and the return on investment is not well quantified. In other words, the business problem is either not well understood or well quantified. And then when challenges start to happen, it's easy to just say, let's just stop, or we're not going to scale this. So again, I would say focusing on that is key. We can't, we can't have a hammer looking for nails. We got to look for the nails and find out what is the right hammer for this nail. And I do think this is a trap that many have fallen into and still fall into, is really trying to figure out, ChatGPT, where can I apply that? I think I would look at it differently. It's about, again, what are the business problems? What are the biggest business problems in the biggest opportunities for ROI? And then what are the right things? How could we solve this? And then, of course, if ChatGPT or AI or any other technology plays a role in that, it could play. That's where we focus on, not the other way around. And I think it's very easy, especially in the technology space, to do the other way around. We're trying to figure out ways to, make the technology fit the problem, or find a way to do something with the technology. And I think we got to be very careful with that. So in a nutshell, focus on the business problem or the opportunity, not on the technology.
Fantastic advice. Thank you. Brian, you want to share your closing thoughts here?
Absolutely. So I'd say that I think the first thing I'd say is it starts with vision. And so instead of saying, how do we reduce the number of workplace safety accidents, for instance, right? Instead saying, okay, if we wanted to have a vision where we had absolutely no safety incidences in our factories, what would have to be true for that to be a reality? And then work backwards from that vision to develop your strategy. And that will ultimately inform what pieces you need to use. Some organizations might need an analog transformation. You might not need AI now, right? It depends on your risk tolerance. There's a lot of factors that go into it, but it should start with vision, like similar to what Maria said, not with the chess piece of AI or with the technology. It should start the other way around. The second thing I'd say is that if you're focusing on modeling out ROI and proving ROI for an advanced technology that's nascent, then that's a recipe for what I call maintenance mode, which fundamentally drives out innovation. And so if you want to have a 2-story home that's 2 stories, you want to be able to navigate between those 2 stories. If you model out the ROI for every step between floor 1 and floor 2, each one in and of itself it doesn't get ROI. You need the whole thing. And so what I'd say is if you have a vision for the future organization that involves digital twins and simulations and AI, and you know that's the future that's coming, you need to do the hard work of setting that vision, building the strategy, and then baking in the long-term total value proposition and how and where you're going to get return investment across the whole swath of initiatives, instead of incrementally on each individual initiatives, because there's several that may not get there on their own, or you can't prove it ahead of time. And so instead you need to use your human skill of reasoning even beyond the data. So moving from data-driven to reason-driven, and leveraging our most essential human skill of reasoning into what would that two-story, that staircase need to be for us to get to that future that we want to get to, and then work all the way down to, and so, you don't even need to take meetings yet. If you haven't already set your vision, you don't need to talk yet about what's possible with ChatGPT. You need to set a vision for your organization first. That's the main takeaway I'd share.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that. I'd like to thank Brian, thank Maria, thanks Sanjeev for being here. Really appreciate the exchange here today, your willingness to share. Also would like to thank SME again for helping to make this LinkedIn Live series possible, and for helping build out this ecosystem of folks like this that will openly share the way they have today. So I would also like to encourage you again to make sure that you know Sesame, follow them on LinkedIn, check out their website, cesmii.org. You can find the recordings of these events on Apple Podcast and Spotify. And then obviously we would encourage you to join us again next month when we do this again. We host these events the last Tuesday of every month. So on August 29th, we will be right back here on LinkedIn Live, and we're going to be talking about continuous improvement in manufacturing. So until then, I just remind you that when you think about smart manufacturing, think differently. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.